For my final video lecture, I have decided to talk about Hamilton's time during the creation of the Assumption Plan. During the Assumption Plan debate, Hamilton faced a lot of support and opposition from various other founding fathers and civilians. So it was interesting to learn about Hamilton's cause for a division between Washington's administration, and I wanted to see just how Hamilton felt about his fellow founding fathers' opposition to the Assumption Plan. Men that were once writing out the Constitution together one year were soon after fighting over exactly what that Constitution meant and what it did allow and did not allow. So I wanted to look into that and see exactly what Hamilton thought of it and how he reacted to the entire situation. So to begin, I would like to go back to right after the end of the Revolutionary War in 1783. Once the war ended, America found itself in great financial debt after trying to supply all of the equipment, supplies, and labor to fight the war. The country was starting off on the wrong foot with the state's debts that needed to be eliminated in order for the states to survive and move forward. Washington, who was our first president, assigned Alexander Hamilton to the role as Secretary of Treasury. Hamilton received this responsibility due to Washington's fondness of his hard work and commitment that he saw throughout the Revolutionary War, as long as during the creation of the Constitution, as well as various other documents, including the Federalist Papers. In the meantime as well, Washington also appointed Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State, who actually had completely opposite views of Hamilton, but yet they had to work side by side in the new country here. But as Secretary of Treasury, Hamilton was held responsible for resolving the state's debt. Hamilton found one way he thought would be ideal for states to be relieved of their debts, and for the national government to have a larger and more important presence. Hamilton proposed the Assumption Plan, in which the national federal government would assume all of the state's debts. The national government would then pay off the debt by raising money by issuing bonds to interested investors. These investors would buy bonds at a very fair price that would turn into profits in the future. Hamilton also proposed that all of this financial activity would require a national financial institution or a national bank. He claimed that this new and established national bank would help to stabilize the economy and currency for the country. Of course, Hamilton's plan was picked apart by some and glorified by others. When taken to the House of Representatives, the bill was passed by 34 votes to 28 votes. Two very important men in history spoke directly to Hamilton about the Assumption Plan, and those men were Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. Madison may have opposed the bill, but did not speak out publicly about it, at least not at first. This was all due to the compromise put forth by himself and Hamilton during a dinner party hosted by Thomas Jefferson right after the Revolutionary War, and Hamilton offered Madison the ability to choose the location for the national capital in his territory, which in the end was placed on the edge of the Potomac River, and in turn, Hamilton asked for Madison to not oppose the Assumption Plan. He didn't say to favor the Assumption Plan, but to just not oppose and not speak out publicly and go against the Assumption Plan. Madison graciously accepted this compromise to choose the location of the capital in turn for not opposing the Assumption Plan. After the Assumption Plan takes effect, Hamilton says that the Assumption Plan requires the federal government to impose a federal tax system. Madison does not agree with this, however, with this tax system, especially since his territory of Virginia would be required to pay a very large sum. In fact, Virginia would have to pay nearly $5 million in taxes when the state had only created $3 million in debt. So, of course, Madison did not want to, he did not see this as a good opportunity for him, even though it was equal for the entire country. So Madison proposes to deny the Assumption Plan, and he takes it to the House of Representatives, but is immediately shut down. And this is due to Hamilton's favorability in the House and that they didn't want to find another alternative because it would be too complicated to deal with, whereas they thought that Hamilton already had a good plan right there, so why not go with it? One of the other main founding fathers who opposed Hamilton's plan, of course, was Jefferson. But Jefferson at the beginning did support Hamilton's plan. Jefferson knew that the debt would have to be paid off somehow and in some way, so at that point in time he was kind of open to anything. Over time, Jefferson began to disagree with the decisions Hamilton made through the plan. He feared that Hamilton's actions would create many issues later on, and Jefferson believed that the basic power structure of the United States relies solely on the states being able to make their own internal economic decisions. Once Hamilton wanted a national bank, Jefferson began to become very skeptical of the entire Assumption Plan, and he did not appreciate Hamilton's capitalist view on the state's debts. And that goes back to when he wanted to offer bonds to investors, more of that capitalist view, because they'd be interested since they'd get a good return on that bond. So because Hamilton had that capitalist view, Jefferson lost trust in Hamilton. And Jefferson wanted to keep the individuals at the heart of the republic. He believed that's what the United States relies on, and he wants a smaller government with the hands resting in the with the power resting in the hands of the people. Little by little, Hamilton started to take personal offense to the opposition of both men. Even after he thought they were all on the same page, he made a good negotiation with Madison. He thought that him and Jefferson were on the same page. They were both going to resolve the national debt. Everything was going to be okay. But then things start changing. Then they start arguing and fighting against him. So he expressed his frustration in a letter written to Edward Carrington in 1792. And Hamilton said, "I became convinced of the following truth, that Mr. Madison, cooperating with Mr. Jefferson, is at the head of a faction decidedly hostile to me and my administration, and actuated by views in my judgment subversive of the principles of good government and dangerous to the Union. Peace and happiness to the country." So basically, Hamilton not only knew that they were strongly against him, but that they were holding preconceived opinions about his plans based on their past differences with each other. And Madison and Jefferson were opposing all of Hamilton's plans and bills just because he viewed the country and economy in a different way than they did. Even if Hamilton's plans would be better for the country in the end, Madison and Jefferson opposed them due to Hamilton's political standings. So this letter is proof that Hamilton is very aware of this and becomes no longer worried about their opinions. Therefore, Hamilton turns his efforts to gaining the favorability of President Washington and Congress. And going back to the Constitution days, the Founding Fathers had spent countless hours working together to create a Constitution for the United States were now arguing over what actions were actually constitutional and what actions were not. And as an example, when Hamilton proposed a national bank, both Madison and Jefferson claimed that a national bank was unconstitutional, since the Constitution did not specifically state anything about Congress having the authority to create a national bank. Hamilton responded, in complete opposition, claiming that the national bank was in fact constitutional. Hamilton replied with the doctrine of implied powers, which I'm sure most of you have heard of, but he argued that this doctrine gave Congress the power to create a national bank, since the Constitution granted the federal government the authority to carry out any actions that were necessary and proper. And Hamilton argued that what was necessary and proper was any decision to carry out the proper constitutional functions. Hamilton said the national bank was constitutional because it was necessary in order for the government to handle its financial or fiscal responsibilities. Therefore, it was both necessary and proper. In 1791, Congress favored Hamilton and his strong argument by passing a bill to create the very first national bank, which would last, the bill lasted for 20 years. President Washington was, of course, required to be the final signature needed to decide whether the bank was necessary and therefore constitutional. President Washington, of course, signed the bill, so this becomes proof that the necessary and proper clause is kind of that one where even though it doesn't state it directly in the Constitution, it still can be constitutional as long as it's good for the country. It's necessary in order for the country to proceed to the next step. So Hamilton's argument there definitely was proof that how you interpret the Constitution and how you kind of work your way around the Constitution to find what's better for the country as long as it's necessary for proper is very important. And I think that a lot of future bills were passed due to that clause and due to Hamilton's precedent set forth there. Over time, Hamilton also views his opposition by certain members on Washington's administration as an opportunity. So he goes from frustrated to seeing things as an opportunity. And he knows because he has an opposing view compared to them, that's okay because they need a new and fresh idea in the White House. So he knows Washington is stressed over the arguments between himself and the other fellow founding fathers, and he writes him a letter in 1792 to provide some reassurance to Washington. In this letter, Hamilton said, "The feelings and views which are manifested in that letter are such as I expected and would exist, and I most sincerely regret the causes of the uneasy sensations you experience. It is my most anxious wish, as far as may depend on me, to smooth the path of your administration, and to render it prosperous and happy. If any prospect shall open of healing or terminating the differences which exist, I shall most cheerfully embrace it. Though I consider myself as the deeply injured party, the recommendation of such a spirit is worthy of the moderation and wisdom which dictated it. And if your endeavors should prove unsuccessful, I do not hesitate to say that in my opinion, the period is not remote when the public good will require substitutes for the differing members of your administration. The continuance of a division there must destroy the energy of government, which will be little enough with the strictest union. On my part, there will be a most cheerful agreement in such a result." This portion of the letter shows that Hamilton does not want to act in a way just to anger his peers. Hamilton sees his differing opinions compared to others, such as Jefferson and Madison, as an opportunity, and he is not willing to stand down on his opinions because he believes they are necessary to break away from the tradition and to better the country overall. Even though he considered himself the deeply injured party, he will continue to fight because he wants what's best for the country, so he will look at it from a positive viewpoint from there on.